As I mentioned before, we had a group of 38 just recently go down to Mexico. We had 18 students, and the rest were adults and a few small kids. And we were able to get a lot of work done down there. We were able to get many projects with concrete, painting, roofing, wire pulling, and I think the wires turned into jump ropes eventually. And it was just, we had a lot of fun being able to do some of these things. But it's not all about the work. It's the relationships that were built between students, adults, also people from the ranch, the kids there. For those of you who don't know, Rancho Santa Marta is an orphanage for kids who have disabilities, children with special needs. There's a school. There's a lot going on down there. And the fact that we got to go and bless the missionaries, awesome. But the fact that we got to go and build relationships, even better. And today, you're going to hear some of those stories from some people on the team, a couple students, and you're going to be able to hear what God has done in their lives through this trip. This leads me into as the passage of scripture that I had for you guys today, and it's when Jesus feeds the 5,000. So if I could have you guys stand up for the reading of God's word. We're going to be in Matthew 14. Verse 13, it says, "Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Now when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, 'This is a desolate place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food for themselves.' But Jesus said, 'They need not go away. You give them something to eat.' They said to him, 'We have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish.' And he said, 'Bring them here to me.' Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing. Then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of the broken pieces left over. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children." May God add his blessing to the reading of the word. Go ahead and take a seat. This is one of my favorite stories in the Bible. And I'm a guy who loves stories. I love stories. I love sharing stories. I love hearing stories. And it goes along just with the amazing thing that God does. In this story, there's so many things that just doesn't make sense. If you think about this story, really. So let's set the scene. The first thing is that Jesus was going to a desolate place because he had just learned that John the Baptist had been killed. So he had just learned that John the Baptist had been killed, so he was going to be alone. And it says that the crowds heard this, and they heard this, and they thought, well, we don't want Jesus to be alone, so let's go and build community with him. Let's go be with him. So they do this, and then you have these disciples, these guys that followed Jesus, that didn't really know what was going on half the time, I think, but they are around Jesus, and they see these crowds coming, and Jesus finds compassion on them and begins to heal their sick. And then the disciples are like, "Okay, Jesus, my people clock is over. I am done with all these people. I'm done with these 5,000. Send them away. Let us go and hang out by ourselves." And Jesus says, "No, you're going to feed them." And then the disciples are like, "How are we going to feed 5,000 people with 2 fish and 5 loaves?" And then the crazy part, like that I still can't wrap my head around this, is so like when the bread got cut and got distributed, did it then like grow back? Was there like a giant loaf? Like I don't really know how this worked. It doesn't make sense. But the story finishes that everyone was filled. Everyone was filled with food, and there was more than was needed. There was an abundance. Like this story just blows my mind, and it just shows the power of God. But as I was thinking about this story, what is the message? What's the big idea that I wanted to get across today? The big idea is one word, and it's compassion. When I read this story multiple times, that is the word that stuck out. Because it says that when Jesus saw the crowd, he had compassion and healed their sick. So it made me start thinking about, well, okay, what is compassion? Compassion, our worldview of compassion, I think, is way off than what Jesus' view of compassion is. And what I mean by that is, we just had an opportunity to go on a missions trip. I myself have been on many missions trips. The first one I ever went on was here with this church. We went to Canada. I've done missions trips in Portland. I've done missions trips to the Dominican, Uganda. I've been a lot of places and done a lot of things where God has impacted my life and I've come back changed. And so I started thinking about this idea of compassion and the differences, because sometimes we get the idea that compassion is we are going to fix something for someone. I think like Webster's definition was we're going to show pity on someone, and I don't like that. But compassion is we get this idea, and maybe it's our American mindset, maybe it's just our human mindset, but that we're going to go and we're going to do something for someone and we're going to fix their problem. And some of us get that mentality when we go on these missions trips, and I am guilty of it. The first time I ever went to Uganda, the first time I was ever went to Africa, I just graduated high school, and I remember my thought process was like, I am going to go and I am going to love these orphans so well. I'm going to love them so well. I'm going to show the love of Jesus to them. Everyone's going to be saved that I come in contact with. I am going to do amazing things. Talk about an arrogant teenager, okay? But that was my mindset. And it wasn't a bad mindset to want to go and share the love of Jesus with people. It wasn't that, but I learned what compassion was. I learned the difference. So when I got to Africa and we got to Community of Hope, the orphanage there, and we get off the bus and all of these kids just come running towards you, and they're hanging on your arms and they're laughing and they're giggling and they're giving high fives and they're hugging, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful scene. But as I got in there and started building relationships, there was this girl, her name was Teddy. And I will tell you, Teddy ruined my life. For the good. But Teddy ruined my life. She, as we're sitting there and we were having these conversations, she was trying to teach me Lugandan, their language. She was giving me some words. She was giving me some phrases. We were just going back and forth, laughing and talking. And we got to talk about Jesus. And then she talked about how she knew Jesus and knows the love of God. And I thought, well, shoot, that was one of the things I was supposed to do. But she's sitting there and we're talking. And after, it was probably the second night, I went home. And I was just in tears at our compound, in my bunk. I just was in tears because my whole mindset has shifted of I am going to do this to this girl has shown me so much love. She has wrecked me. She has showed me what compassion looks like. And it's not me doing something, but it's someone else who has showed me that this is a lifestyle. Compassion, being a compassionate person is a lifestyle. It's not just a thing we do. And I think that's something we have to wrestle with, is that compassion is a thing versus compassion is a lifestyle. So we're going to talk about that today. And where I find really a great definition of what compassion is Matthew 25:36-40. It says, I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, truly, I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me. And why I think that's a great definition is because in your outline, there's a part there that's bolded. And the part that's bolded is when the righteous come back to Jesus and they say, Jesus, when did we see these things? When were you like this? When were you like that? And it's that mentality that they have, that they were living a compassion lifestyle. They were living a compassion lifestyle. It wasn't just a thing they were doing for people, but it was a lifestyle they were living. Today we're going to talk about how compassion is gained to be a lifestyle, and one of the ways that compassion is gained by is through community. It's gained by community. Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. Now I had already said this, but Jesus was going to a desolate place to be alone because John the Baptist had died. But these crowds hear that. They hear about Jesus and they hear about this story and they say, well, we're going to go be with Jesus. We want to surround him with community. Now I'm going to have a student come up and her name's Ava. So Ava, come on up. She's going to share a story with us about how she experienced community on this Mexico missions trip. But as she is reading her story, we're going to throw this question up on the screen, and it is, who are you surrounded by? Who are you surrounded by? As she reads her story, think about that question. Go for it.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ava. Sorry. And this is my story. I realize the people around me are the people who God has given to me to encourage and save. I'm 15 years old, and I just came back from our trip to Rancho Santa Marta in Mexico. This was my first mission trip ever, and as I see it, it was a pretty big one. I first mentioned it as something I might want to do, and the next thing I knew, I was getting my passport at the post office. I was very nervous to go, and as the trip approached, I was wishing I could find a way out of it. I was struggling with my religion, and going on a week-long trip about being faithful and spreading Jesus' love sounded hypocritical, and I believed that I didn't deserve to go. Still, I ended up going on the trip despite dreading every bit of it. On the first day, we drove 17 hours to stay in California before heading to Mexico. In those 17 hours, I probably talked a total of 5 times. I only knew one person on the trip, my cousin Jared, so I kept close and quiet and avoided as much interaction as possible. The first 2 days in Mexico were rough. I texted my parents constantly about how I wanted to go home. I felt like I had no reason to be there and that I was more of a hindrance than a help. Defying our expectations, the first few days were rainy and windy. This meant we couldn't do much work. Instead, we went to the gym and played with the children. Most of the kids were between 5 and 10, with a couple of outliers. Once again, feeling like I was in the way, I stood off to the side. At one point, Rachel called me over and asked if I could translate the rules to freeze tag. I've taken 11 years of Spanish, and with the 2 native speakers out of the room, that meant I had the most experience and ability to speak. I was very nervous and worried I wouldn't know what to say. Rachel told me I didn't have to if I didn't feel comfortable, but I felt the kids needed it and it was my job to help them. I translated the rules as best I could and all the kids understood despite me calling it cold tag. After that, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I began to feel like I found my reason to be there. I felt like God had just shined a light on my path, and then I began to talk more with the kids. I felt like I was becoming part of the community, even talking more with the people from our church. I played games and joked around with the kids that night and enjoyed all of it. My texts to my parents that night were a lot different from the previous ones. One of the nights, we were given the chance to eat with the houses on the ranch. In our house, I had to translate for everyone. I asked about their jobs and their situation on the ranch, and they told me, and I relayed their words as best I could to the English speakers. The house residents really appreciated my translating and contributions to the group. That's when I started to feel the same security I felt before. These people didn't care that my Spanish was messy, they simply cared that I was there and that I was willing to talk with them. They were happy to see people who wanted to help and give them the support they deserved. For the rest of the week, I talked and made friends with many of the people in a way I'd never really done before. We were all working for the same reason, to give help to these families and give them full and faithful lives. Within that goal, I felt connected even to those I hadn't talked to. At that point, my view of the trip became less about making it go by as fast as possible so I could get home, and instead it became about making the biggest impact I could for the amazing people I had met. I made sure that I would leave the ranch in a better state than when I arrived, not just with the cosmetic changes to the outside, but I wanted to leave the kids with fun memories they can look back on. After several days of training work, our last day in Mexico approached. We had one last dinner together where we were invited all the people on the ranch to come eat with us. I was still nervous at the start and gravitated to the people I knew. Once I sat, I was once again asked to translate for the group. As I was translating, I began to realize how much of a blessing it was for me to be able to bridge the language barrier between us. I realized that I was an important part of the community and that I was able to help both parties by simply talking. At that moment, I found myself thanking God for the opportunity to learn Spanish and the many years of dedication it took. Eventually, the conversation was just between me and one of the Mexican workers. I learned his story, he told me his struggles, and he told me why he joined the ranch. He told me how grateful he was for the programs like ours that come down to the ranch to help. He explained in detail that it was so beautiful that we came down to spread the Lord's word and to give children as much enjoyment as possible. I'd be lying if I said I didn't want to cry hearing his words. That moment changed my perspective entirely. I realized so much all at once. This was the first time I had ever used my biliteracy for anything other than schoolwork and eavesdropping in grocery stores. I realized that the challenges I faced in my 11 years of learning were so I could have an impact on these people's lives. I could help these people who deserve so much more than they had. What was previously a shaky and inconsistent faith in God became a sturdy understanding of his existence and his plan for me. I'd never not believed in God. I grew up in a Christian household and I didn't even know there was other religions until I was 10. But now, I felt like I was choosing and understanding God rather than just knowing of him. I felt like God went from a stranger you see on the other side of the road into someone holding my hand and leading me across a path of uncertainty. When we prayed and worshiped with each other that night, I felt more comfortable with the people I was with. I lost the feeling of being an outsider. I lost the feeling of being an imposter among strong believers. I felt like I belonged, and I felt like the impact I had left on the ranch more strongly. I felt the impact I had left on the ranch, but more strongly I felt the impact the ranch had on me. I came back from Mexico a very different person than when I left. I finally felt like I had a purpose and a reason to believe in God. Now I have a relationship with him. It no longer feels like I'm praying because my family told me to. Now I seek things to pray for. I find things to be grateful for. Now I will make room in my life for my religion, and I will make the sacrifices needed to be closer with my God. Being with the community in Mexico made me decide to live differently. I learned the importance of having a relationship with God and with the people around me, and the importance of seeking out ways to help others. I learned that everyone can use help and everyone is able to help, but the strength to act is what separates those who are living for God from those who are living with God. I realize that people around me are the people who God has given me to encourage and serve. Thank you.
Man, what an awesome story. What an awesome testimony of a 15-year-old girl who just went completely out of her comfort zone to be able to do something that she probably never thought she could do. And it was all through community. And one of the things that I love about her story, and that goes along with this question of who are you surrounded by, is that she came back changed from the people that were around her, right? Like, she came back in a way that she is now going to live differently. She said that in her story, and her life is now changed, and her lifestyle has changed, and that is some of the great things about this. So who are you surrounded by? Are you surrounded by people who are going to make you live differently? Something to think about. The second way that compassion is gained by believing. Gained by believing. Now, the believing that I'm talking about isn't the believing in Jesus. If you follow Jesus and you are a Christ follower, you believe in Jesus. You believe in him, right? We're clear on that. But what I'm talking about is believing in something before it happens, right? Believing in that you're going to be able to do something with Christ's help. In verse 15, it says, "Now when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, 'This is a desolate place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food for themselves.' But Jesus said, 'They need not go away. You give them something to eat.' They said to him, 'We have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish.'" The disciples didn't believe that God could do something. You notice that? The disciples didn't believe that these people could be fed. But Jesus already saw it happening. Jesus already knew that his disciples were going to feed these 5,000 people. I'm going to have Lily come up. Lily is another high school student who was a part of our trip, and she's going to share a story. And as she's sharing her story, this question is going to be up on the screen. I want you to think about this question, is how does Jesus see you? How does Jesus see you? Go ahead and share your story.
Hi, my name is Lily, and this is my story. I realized I could believe God could accomplish his work through me. I'm a senior at West Albany High School, and this is my second time going on this trip. I knew after the first time I was definitely going to have to go again, purely because of how much I feel like I was able to deepen my relationship with God. This Mexico trip, I really feel like it was different for me. I feel like I was just surrounded by God in everything. The people, the kids, the nature, the church service, everything felt so pure in the best way possible. I feel like I was able to use these experiences to see God in every situation. But more specifically, I'll be talking about the project I was assigned during this trip. The majority of the time, I was working on painting the outsides of 2 school buildings. This painting project was completely student-led. Now, at the time, I didn't know that because I guess I just didn't use my critical thinking skills or look around to see that it was just us students, but whatever. At first, we all looked at this project and felt like it wasn't going to be too hard, just a little painting on these 2 buildings, and it would be done, and we could go serve on another project. But once we got there, we already had 2 people hand scraping the backside of the building to reveal the holy rotting wood in some places, which then it came to our attention that this was going to be more difficult than we initially thought. So as time went on, we had 3 people painting the front side of the building where the paint was not chipping, and the same 2 people still in the back scraping because we had no more scraping tools. And the 3 people from the front then had to walk across the ranch to go get some ladders, and because my judgment is very bad, they could have been anywhere from 6 to 10 feet tall. All I know is that they were taller than I was. Once the painters got to the top section of the building, I found myself standing on 1 foot on the very top of the ladder, reaching as far as I could above my head to paint this last section, which then caused my life to flash before my eyes. At this point, I felt like I was starting to lose hope just slightly that we were going to be able to finish this project based on all the things that kept coming up, and it just felt like every single odd was against us. But then, once the scrapers were able to come and help us paint, it started to go a little bit faster. And after we had finished scraping the back, we had to have someone fill in all the missing chunks of wood with wood filler, and then we had to wait for that to dry so that we could paint over it on the very last day. And by that last day, we had a full team of people keeping us together, and I thought we were definitely going to be able to finish this project just based on our team's work ethic and the faith they all had in each other, which made me believe that we could do it too. By the end of this project, I felt like my mindset had done a complete 360 from feeling like we're definitely going to be able to finish this project and more to we're not finishing this project, and then back to feeling like we were going to be able to finish it, which was an amazingly interesting feeling. I feel like the people around you and their mindset can definitely alter the way that you perceive the situation and can determine whether or not you believe you're going to finish something, which is why I feel like it's really important to surround yourself with people who have God in their lives, because those people are definitely more likely to see the positive in the situation. I think that God was able to get me to see and understand that in every situation, there are always 2 sides, and you can see either one. It just depends on how you look at it and what you want to believe. My name is Lily, and I realized I could believe God could accomplish his work through me.
Another just story of someone who their life has been changed through this mission trip, through that a simple painting project, right? Well, I thought it was simple, but it really ended up being a lot more than it actually was. And I think that this question of how does Jesus see you, we don't ask that a lot. Sometimes I think we're more worried about, maybe what do others think of us? What are we doing? What are we doing to please others? What are we doing? And oftentimes we don't ask this question of how does Jesus see you? And I think about this, how even in our worship, right? When we worship, like God, are we asking God, how was my worship today? Are we asking him that? Or are we thinking about ourselves of maybe, I didn't like this or I didn't like that? But I think that in order to gain compassion, in order to live that compassion lifestyle, you have to be willing first to see what Jesus thinks of you. It's a question to think about. And the last way that compassion is gained by abundance. abundance. We see this in Matthew 14:20. It says, "And they all ate and were satisfied, and they took up 12 baskets full of the broken pieces left over." And this is that moment, right, where everybody has eaten, everybody is full, they're sitting on the grass, and there is still food everywhere. There's still food, and they're collecting it, and there's an abundance. I'm going to invite my friend Charles. He's going to share a story with you today about how he experienced this abundance mindset. And the question that we're going to throw up on the screen as he makes his way up here, and for something to think about, is what are you overflowing with? What are you overflowing with? Come on over here, Charles. Yeah, you're going to share your story. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Charles Craw, and I got added on by some people. I have been overflowed with an abundance of joy because of the inspiring young people. Isn't Lily and Ava something else? They're awesome. I've been a member of this church since February of 2004. Now that's 2004. A few years back, it took a while, didn't it? A few years back, I was encouraged to go on this mission trip to Mexico, even bribed. They say, "Charles, you've got to go. The tacos are great." This was my fourth trip to the ranch, Santa Maria. Each year I ask God to give me wisdom and voice and to communicate with the people that surround me. I'm always pleasantly amazed of our young people's faith. Their prayers are meaningful. They know the words to the faith music that's played, and they know scriptures. I see them throughout the day reading their Bibles, this on their own. I've been privileged to talk with a few on a one-to-one basis, getting to know about their plans, today's language, and today's manners. And I sometimes feel old there. They listen to what I have to say. From my experience of the years I've been around. And they might relate those to their lives, and hopefully it is good. I gain strength and inspiration from these talks in my own walk with Jesus. Long after the trip has ended and seeing them here in church, again, I have been overflown with an abundance of joy because of these inspiring young people.
Good job. If you don't know Charles, you should get to know Charles. He's a man that I see that is overflowing with an abundance of compassion, joy, and love for people. When he was on the ranch, he had a project of fixing some bookshelves. And one of the things that he did while he was there is he spent a lot of time talking to young people and investing in them. People from our trip, from our team, and just sharing that love and the things that he had to say, I know changed the students' lives for forever. So that question of what are you overflowing with? We're going to worship here in a moment, and I want you to think about these questions and think about maybe there's one that stood out a little more to you than another one. But this last one that I really think about is, what are you overflowing with? Are you overflowing with maybe fear? Maybe you're overflowing with anxiety. Maybe you're overflowing with anger. My hope would be that as we worship and as we spend time in God's presence, that you'd be able to give those things to the Lord and let those spots be filled with joy, peace, patience, compassion. So we're going to worship together and just think about some of those questions as we worship.